what's interesting? I'm a why person, right? So
Yeah.
tell me why I'm doing it. Who's it going to help? What's the goal? What are we trying to accomplish? If I can understand like the reasoning behind it, I usually can get on board. But like my biggest pet peeve is because we said so, or because the state said so, or because management said so. I'm always like, you can kick rocks. I'm not doing it. I don't know what level that is. That might be on another level. I'm usually on another level. Remember, I'm a people displeaser. So, um, with that being said, even though that's super important to me and something I try to incorporate into anything I communicate, here's what we're doing, here's why it's important, here's some value behind it. Um, there's other people that don't want to hear about the why, they could care less. My sister-in-law is like that. She's always like, I hate going to meetings where they're like, oh, this is our plan. Here are the goals, blah, blah. She's like, just tell me what you want me to do and when you want me to do it, and I'll do it. I don't need to know the why behind it. Like, you don't pay me enough to care about the reasoning. Just tell me what to do. And that exists too. Like again, I maybe I don't understand that mentality because of the way that I think, but I'm not going to say that she's wrong. That's just her preference. And so for leaders, again, this is why being flexible is such an important thing. If I have an employee who's telling me like, I don't need the backstory. Just tell me what form to fill out and when you need it, and I'm happy to do it. Tell me what it's supposed to say there, and I'll do it. And others might be like, what's the point of it? What are we collecting? What are we looking at? How do we do this? How's this going to be used? Like we have to be able to accommodate all of those needs. And that's challenging to do a lot of times too, because we teach people oftentimes in the preference that we have. So again, if my style is just do it, I always did what my boss told me. I didn't ask any questions. So here's what I'm telling you to do, just do it. As a leader, I might get really offended with someone saying, well, why? Who made the decision? What rules are we following? Who's this supposed to benefit? Why did you choose this? If someone might get really like put off by that, like, shut the hell up and just do your job. Why are you asking so many questions? But
Mm.
for other people, like, I want to do it. I'm very invested in doing it, but I just need to wrap my head around it so I make sure I do it well. People just need different things, and there's no one right way. The right way is what works for that individual.
But what you said about our preferences in leading is so true, right? So we might have a preference for, and I ask people in classes when I teach this, right? Which one of these sounds like what you're most comfortable doing? Many people who are very comfortable telling you what to do. This is
Mhm.
what you need to do. This is how you need to get it done. This is due by then, right? And if you have any type of question, well, you didn't hear me the first time. Well, I mean, do I need to spell it out for you, right? And so then you also have those other folks, like you mentioned, who, are trying to coach you, let you know why, helping you through it. And if you just have a question just on something, that's technical or tactical or strategic, and they're trying to coach you through it. Coaching is wonderful, but it's not the right mode for every single conversation, right?
Right.
Like, so when does this do? Well, think about, what when we talked about it on Tuesday, what were the due date? No, can you just tell me what time when it's due?
Right.
And
Yeah. I
there's a time and place for everything, right? And then
right.
you have the other, that level three where people are just trying to pump people. You're doing great. You're getting the hang of it. I really, dig your style, and people are really responding to, and just keep going. You're the man. I won't say the words, the RS, because I'm learning. I don't want to get slapped through the,
Triggered. The
yes,
beach wave. Take you
yes,
down.
right. And then there's some folks who are hands off, and well, they should know how to do this. They've been doing this long enough. I'll just leave them alone and just be there if they need me, right? And so those can correlate, right? We have the idea. I mean, and sometimes it's our personalities. I mean, I tend to think when we think about the disc, right? You can see that, D's are very much in the directive. I mean, if they're not careful,
Yeah.
right? S's can be very much the coaching, and the one-on-one, those relationships, spending time thinking about it. Eyes are going to pump you up in that third level, the mentorship, and tell you what's going on. And sometimes the C's are just going to let you kind of figure things out or analyze things and maybe not give you the, a response very quickly, right? Because they're trying to make sure, what's going on. So, I mean, and that's not 100% true, but it's also something where I can see those behaviors also in our personalities and the way that we interact with folks, right? Or even our experience level, right? So, and some of us learn through different ways, right? Some of us are auditory learners and visual learners and kinesthetic learners. And so making sure that we spend enough time with our learners, with our team members, with our employees to understand, you know, what helps them to learn and to master those skills and abilities and mindsets that can make a
Mhm.
difference.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with you when I was laughing about like not everything is coachable. And I always think of the example of, hey, where do we keep the blue pens? Well, I don't know. Where do you think we should keep the blue pens? Like sometimes you just got to tell people where the freaking blue pens are, right?
Yeah.
Not everything is coachable. Um, and with all of that, like knowing when to lean into one over another. Like again, like I think you kind of nailed it with the disc with the who's directing and all of that. But I also will say C's might be more directive because they want perfection. So they may be really quick to tell you, but here's the policy, read it, and then we're going to
Yeah.
go over it
Right.
together.
But
Right.
that's the thing. Here's a policy, read it,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Which is not necessarily, directive right off the bat,
Mhm.
right? So yeah, so a lot of times when
Yeah.
people need that
Yeah.
support, they may be looking for, direct support and they may not always get it, or they may just need just a reminder, right? So there's a
Yeah.
time and place
No,
for
I
everything.
agree. I just, it takes me back to when I first started training 177 years ago. Um, I did induction training for new eligibility workers. That was like my first like getting jumped into training. And I was really good at the programs, and I had to like get my feet like grounded into what kind of instructor I was going to be. And um, you think but you have no idea until you're like really into it. And I remember in like one of my first classes, again, one of my peers now, the one I was talking about in the last episode, that she's very detailed and, likes a lot of information. Um, we used to do these little checkpoints that were like little ten multiple choice questions. And there was one very obvious right answer to the question, one very obvious. We didn't have like trick questions. We wanted people to pass the assessment. Anyways, she was famous for always wanting to choose a different answer, but then give an explanation why that was the answer. And so I remember, like, again, in that coaching role, I used to pull her aside because she was very smart. She is very smart. She's a highly, highly intelligent, um, very detail oriented person. And I would tell her, if you have to write an essay question response to the answer, that's probably not the right one. Like, keep it simple, right? Just try to keep it simple. What is the most obvious answer? You're overcomplicating. And she'd be like, okay. So then she'd take her next test. You would like watch her like just get super stressed out before any assessment. And again, for me, I'm thinking these are so easy. They're so easy. But for her, she was really just digging deeper into, 'cause she really wanted to learn and she really wanted to understand all of the what ifs. And I'm like, keep it surface. Keep it surface. You're thinking too much about that. So I still think about that today. She still writes essay questions for multiple choice answers. I guarantee if she's out there, again, I don't want to say her name in case she doesn't want me talking about her behind her back in front of her face. But, um, I just, that was like a good learning experience for me, that it may seem very simple on the surface, but people think deeper than that. And so where I'm a very big picture surface type thinker for the most part, like whatever's the most obvious must be right. other people think, well, what if there's a caveat? What if it's a full moon and Mercury's in retrograde and there's a southwesterly wind coming from, whatever. So I have to keep that in mind as well and stay flexible for people who do think that way, which is not necessarily my forte. The other thing that this made me think about is also like whatever your style is, I think depends on what role that you're in. And sometimes it's hard to shift from one role to another. And so for me as an instructor, I'm almost always in the directing role. I'm always, in that directing, usually teaching information, but I keep it at like the D1, D2 type of style because some people already know the concepts, they just don't know how to practice it. And so it's like a fine line of navigating between both directing and coaching. So I like as an instructor, I really try to use the coach approach in the way that I instruct. So here's some information, and then here's an opportunity to process it and think how it applies to you. What does this look like in your life? So a lot of like that development, the kind of layered learning, and doing a lot of incorporating the different ways that people learn. So let's have some visuals, let's have a handout, let's have activities, let's have case studies, let's have scenarios, let's have, depending on what it is. But really creating a lot of opportunities for people to think about it and how it applies to them and facilitate a dialogue. Now, that's my role as an instructor. As a coach, when I step into the coach role, which if for all of you who don't know, you can catch me on my website, givingthegiftcoaching.com for any coaching needs. That was a shameless plug for my coaching business. But as a coach, I'm not in the directing. That's actually the opposite of what my role is as a coach. So I don't do any directing. I'm highly supportive and really have to understand that people are capable and holding them capable and giving them space to process through my support and observation and engagement without telling them what to do or what I know or what I would do. And so, in no case would I be a coach that's directive because that's not what my role is. And sometimes it's a hard shift, again, of really kind of being intentional in the way that you show up as a leader. Am I here to teach them something or am I here to help them develop? What is my role right now and what's the best way to approach it? And so that's part of, I think, the thought process between situational leadership is not just assuming that your engagement with this other person is going to be organic, right? Like I'm going to know what they need and show up the right way and what they need, but it's really about stepping back and thinking about where they're at and thinking about your role and asking yourself the question, what does this person need from me right now? How do I need to show up? And this also means for you as a leader, developing the skill sets in these other areas where maybe you're not as comfortable, and kind of leaning into that discomfort zone of maybe I don't know how to coach. Maybe I don't know how to delegate. Maybe I've got control issues and I want to have my hands in all the cookie jars. But really being able to find a way to adapt yourself as a leader to be able to meet those situations. And that sometimes is the biggest challenge is leaning into something that's not familiar or it doesn't feel right because it's not what you're used to.
It's one of the really important skills. In fact, it's one of the main skills that is identified in situational leadership, right? Is the diagnosing, right? So just recognizing where your individual learner is, right? And how can we help them, and how do we know where they are? What are they telling us? What are they showing us? Right. So, and even having them involved in the diagnosis, right? So asking those questions, right? So how are you feeling about this? What's going on? You can even, you know, diagnose with some coaching questions. So what are you experiencing, right? Um, and what do you know? What are some things that you want to know? What would you like to see happen? What would you like to um, where would you like to be? What would success look like? Right. Well, right now I just need to learn how to use a stupid program. Okay. So you want to learn the basics of the program. So, what is it that you want to learn? Well, I need to know what screens I'm going to, what codes I'm going to utilize, right? So sometimes we're going back to really basic teaching, right? And understanding. Or it could be, well, I already know how to use the program. It's just, when do I use it and what in what situation, will people need me to utilize it? Well, if you already understand the technical skills, now maybe it's based off of the situation that you're in, and we can walk people through it, right? Or, I had or just even I had a weird situation where, I put someone into this program and it didn't quite work. I thought that they were ready and they weren't, right? Which might be a D2 or a D3 conversation, right? So,
Hmm.
it can be coaching or, well, yeah, that happened to me too, where I had a challenge and this is what I did, right? So, because those are all different conversations, right? As leaders, we have those different conversations. We have those directive conversations where we're telling people what to do. We're having those coaching conversations where we're really motivating them and helping them feel supported. The level three, the mentorship, where, we're giving them advice sometimes or just pointing them in the right direction. And then the delegating, the cheering on. Hey man, you got this. You're the bee's knees, right?
Hmm.
And how can you take your skill and pass it on to other folks? Because we got other people on your team that I really want them to feel your shine. So what can we do? Right. And so just taking the time to be patient and to recognize where people are can really help them not just to not just for us to effectively interact with them in the right way, but also to feel supported, like we are spending time to understand where they are, which when people feel like you care, like we've been talking about, that they'll respond to you, right? People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, right? And so
Exactly.
getting into that, getting into that diagnosing just by asking questions, letting people know, hey, so I just want to ask you some questions to see where you are so that I can approach this in the most effective way, right? But
Hmm.
and it's not just let me hold hands and babysit because this person's getting it slower than the other person. No, I mean, if this person is a permanent employee and you're not going to be able to just to say kick rocks with no socks. Sorry, I totally stole
It's all
your
right.
motto. But then
You can
that
have it.
I appreciate it. The more that you support them and the more that you spend a little bit more time, maybe something will stick, right?
I agree with you. And, one of the concepts that I think is important to really consider here is that it's not just about tasks and doing the work, but I think it's also conduct and how you behave. And this is what contributes to the culture. And I think a lot of times when people are thinking about these different levels and where do you coach people and where are you directive um, and supportive, they forget the piece about conduct, the how people behave and how it fits in with the culture. Because, sometimes we have people that are highly, highly competent at the job. They can do the job with their eyes closed, with both hands, tied behind their back. But they also suck all of the energy out of the room. They're also difficult to work with. They also are, disrespectful to teammates, or they're aggressive, or they're intimidating, or they make people feel uncomfortable, or they tell terrible jokes and make everybody cringe. Like there's lots of other things that I can think of that distract people from having a well-oiled machine inside of the workplace. And so all of these things that we've been talking about today in the situational leadership doesn't just apply to, what system are we using? What form do we fill out? What's the process for, this particular function? But it's also thinking about how do we resolve conflict? How do we, have conversations in the workplace? What attitude do you need to have when you show up for work? How do we show empathy? How do we provide service? Like these are also things that sometimes need some skill development. Um, and a lot of times are overlooked for the sake of productivity. They're overlooked for the sake of productivity, meaning like, oh, I mean, sure, we all have a sassy Sally at work. Like, oh, the sassy Sally, yeah, she's kind of, you know, you know what, but she does really good work. And so we just kind of accepted that's just how she is. Whereas, I do understand that there's a need for belonging. So sassy Sally wants to be sassy and that's who she is. Great, but not if it's at the expense of other people feeling safe and comfortable in the workplace, you know? And there has to be like the leaders have to step in for that as well and follow some of these same guidelines of, I can know what to do. I can be very, very familiar with the expectation or the directive of, let's say, being kind to people, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to do it. And if you're not having these conversations and maybe showing up as a coach or maybe showing up as being supportive and letting people know, like, I care about your career. And you know how you come in every morning and say, "Good morning, Mother Eppers," and shout that in front, I know that's part of your personality, but I also want you to know you might be hurting your opportunities for promotion. And we see a lot of potential in you, but the way that you communicate with people is really going to hold you back. What are some other ways you can show your enthusiasm for your teammates in the morning that's more professional versus, oh, they just love the F word. They just say it one time in the morning, everybody knows, so we just let it go. You know what I mean? Like those type of things leaders have to pay attention to just as much as the other part of it. Otherwise, you create like a culture of, I can't even think of a good word for it. Misbehaviors. I'm not sure where people are allowed to do whatever they want. There's no consequence. But it comes back to motivation. Like, let's talk about the new system. Bless you. That new system was a huge change for many people. It hurt some counties more than others because some had like the new systems like first cousin. So it wasn't as hard of a transition for some versus others. But there's some counties that are really struggling still. There are people who retired because they're like, not going to learn new system, not this lifetime, not going to do it. And, to each their own. But one of the things that I notice and why I bring up this conduct and this behavior is that we're always going to have to learn new skills. We're always going to keep going through these cycles. And we're all individually, even as a leader, you might think you're really proficient in being a great leader. But if your team changes, you may have to adapt and learn new skills to be able to manage. If you're managing Gen X people, a group of Gen Xers who grew up licking lead paint and breathing asbestos, we got our own problems. The way that you lead Gen X is going to look very different than leading a group of Gen Zers. So, like you have to adapt and change to, again, whatever the reality is. And so you're going to be in different levels and, you're going to be at different components. You talked about when we moved to virtual that you were like telling yourself these stories. I don't know if I want to do this, or I'm really unsure, or, how's this going to translate? I kind of went through the same thing, except I was like, bring it on. I'm ready for a new challenge, right? Like I can't wait to get back into the classroom. So let's figure this virtual thing out. Did I have worries? Of course. I was like, I'm a personality hire. I'm only here for the atmosphere. So I was like, how do I take this riz I have in the classroom and bring it to a virtual environment where people are going to be distracted? How do I, connect with people? Because my superpower is connection. And so I'm like, how's this going to translate? But I was like, teach me all the tricks. What are the bells and whistles? How do I do this? And how do I do that? And I was without a proctor, like one of the first instructors, probably without a proctor, because I didn't want somebody else to run it for me. I wanted to be able to know how to share my screen and show a video, like teach me all the tricks. So I think like the motivation part of it, like you cannot know the skill. It's hard to teach people how to be motivated, but that's where I think the coaching and the supportiveness comes in as the leader to like let people know you're not going to be good at this in the beginning. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to learn and you're going to fail, and that's part of the process. And I'm going to be here to let you know when you're doing it right. I'm going to be here to let you know when you're not getting it right. And I want you to be motivated to change. I want you to be connected to whatever that is, and paying attention to those not just dips in proficiency, but like the dips in the motivation, because that needs some correction. And that includes the behavior and how we treat people, you know? You can't let somebody be in a bad mood for 10 years straight. You know what I mean? Like there has to be some give and take with, again, what are the expectations at work? You just can't let somebody come in and be abusive to people and just be like, just ignore them. Just ignore Sally. She's just sassy.
And if there is somebody who's been in a bad mood for 10 years, you know, like you mentioned, you can't just let it happen, but what can you do to maybe influence maybe a behavior change or what is behind the bad moods? Maybe it's just that person. Maybe the person is Eeyore in real life and doesn't want to see any silver linings. Or maybe, well, you guys throw all this stuff at us and you don't tell us why we need to do it. So I'm just been frustrated because I'm just playing the game because I need to feed my kids, right? And so, when I hear that, I hear an opportunity, to maybe improve behavior or to change perceptions, right? Those things are so, those are opportunity. Frustration and anger shows an opportunity for change, right? As opposed to resignation is hard, right?
Yeah.
Oh, ain't
Yeah.
nothing gonna be any different, right? As opposed to I'm tired of this, right? So okay, you're tired of it, so you want to see something better, right?
Hmm.
And so, that's an opportunity, spending some time with folks, right? So we have, that the diagnosing stage, and then you have the matching piece, which is like we talked about, making sure that when we are engaged with folks, we are engaged with them at the right level, right? So it may be a technical competency piece, it might be that motivation piece. I've been here 20 years. I know how to do this back and forth, and but nothing's changing, right? So that person has high competence, but maybe, you know, varied motivation and commitment. That's somebody's a D3 level, even the person who's been here for 20 years, right? Because they can get stuff done, but they're not necessarily committed. So is that person going to be your mentor or your staff, right? People will very often choose the person who's been there the longest, who has the most institutional knowledge as the mentor. And then what are they communicating to new hires? Don't think, if you're doing more work around here, they're going to give you more work. So don't try to do any more and make us look bad or anything else like that, right? If people aren't necessarily in that level of commitment, that's what's helpful about diagnosing as well. It's not always about
Hmm.
teaching, it's about how we engage and how we can, you know, um, have our team interact with each other in a much more effective way, right? What are some things we can do?
Right.
Who do we put in with the new hires? Who do we put in with someone who's struggling at a specific task, right? And we might have folks that have been here since the 70s and are having issues with technical ability. And we have somebody who's maybe only been here a couple of years, but knows, the system like that. Is that an opportunity for that newer person to help that other person in mentorship and yeah, absolutely. But we have to help them recognize that opportunity, right? So it's very much a nuanced conversation. It's not always about how to's. It's the things that like we talked about yesterday, in the last session, right? The motivation. Why is it important to hear this person? What are they go? How are they going to benefit? The when you tell people because we said so, like you mentioned, retirements happen. I've worked in an organization where people had an opportunity to do something that was going to make their job more than 50% easier, but it wasn't communicated to them that way. It was told, well, that's just what we have to do. And so,
Oh, wow.
like a third of them retired rather than go to this job that was going to make their job that much easier because they weren't given the why. And so, folks said, retirement eligible folks were said, screw it, I don't need to be here. Right. And
Yeah.
so if you're not going to tell me why we're doing it, we have to change. I'd rather just not deal with the hassle. Right.
Right.
So recognizing where we are and how we communicate things, and also what is our go to, and does our go to work for everyone? Right. Such an important piece.
Yeah. It's stay flexible. Remember my favorite phrase. If you stay flexible, you never get bent out of shape, you know? And since we were going with the waves, I have a new one. If you can't stop the waves, you got to learn how to surf. And isn't that a good one? That was juicy, isn't it? Uh, but that's something I think about too with the situational leadership is that anybody who's ever led people know that you have those that are just easier for you to work with than others. And oftentimes it's because they match your style. So they speak the same language that you speak and they get it the way that you get it. So it's just really easy for you to communicate. And then you have those that are maybe a bit more challenging for you. Um, we need a variety of people to work in the workplace. I don't want to hire a bunch of people who think like me and act like me, um, because a lot of stuff is not going to get done. Do you know what I mean? Like, I know my limitations. And if I have a bunch of people who think just like me and act just like me, we're going to be distracted 97% of the time. I need people who, again, can make decisions and stay on track and do some of the planning and pay attention to details because that's not what I'm going to do. So, with that being said, we have those that we gravitate towards, and we have those that maybe are a bit more challenging for us to get it because we just don't get why they're like that. We just don't get why they need so much, you know, encouragement, or we don't get why they need so much direction. I didn't need that when I was learning this. I didn't need that, and so this again, you can't stop the waves. You've got to learn how to surf. You can't stop people who are different from you from joining your team, from joining your workplace, from being in your classrooms, from being on your payroll, whatever that looks like. So even if you prefer that they would be different, they are who they are. You accept them for that. And you have to learn how to surf and navigate that to find out how do I best lead them to what I want them to do. What's the goal here, right? What's the goal? And to tie it into just like one other little concept here is the idea of like crucial conversations. And so when I'm thinking about what leadership style or what approach I'm going to take with whomever I'm dealing with, at the end of the day, I have to ask myself, what is it that I want? Like, what is my need here? Is it my need for them to be proficient? Is it my need to be right? Is it my need to be the expert? Is it a need to, you know, show them who's boss? Is it my need to be an ally? Like, what is it that I want out of that conversation? Because then that helps me understand a little bit more about what do I need to do to be able to show up how I'm needed in that conversation. And I could have a conversation with Carl on Tuesday, and he may need me to be directive, but he might need support on Thursday. And so you really have to again get good at diagnosing and adapting to what people need, even if it's not your preference.
Absolutely. Right. And so just recognizing what is it that people need? What do I need to do? How am I comfortable in having those conversations?
Mhm.
Right. And and what do I need to do to prepare? Right. So that's definitely an important piece. But there are some guidelines, for setting the right stage for a conversation, right? So, just Blanchard folks, right? You want to make sure that it's employee led, right? So that
Mhm.
they're identifying how they're feeling, right? And if we can have those one-on-one meeting guidelines, it can, we can, schedule stuff and make sure that they're regular, right? And then prepare what you want to discuss. What is it that you want to see happen? What does that employee want to see happen? What would they like to have happen at the end of the conversation? And have the employee think about what level they're at for each one of the topics that we're talking about. Where are they? Are they I'm not quite sure. I'm in my level one, level two. It's easy to, for folks who are in level threes or level fours to get to level twos just from lack of motivation, lack of frustration, right? And so, just have them think about what specific. I had many meetings with um my manager where I would come into a meeting with different topics that I was going through just on status meetings where one project I was D4 where I was, very proficient and I was just chugging along. And one I was a D2 where I had questions and I didn't quite, um, I wasn't really connecting with the people I was supposed to be working with. And so sometimes that was a motivation thing. And maybe there were some things where I just needed some advice just to kind of put me over the edge where we're D3, right? And so, having that written there, my boss, who wasn't always necessarily uh, relationship focused, she could recognize, okay, so you're D2 here. So how can I help you through that? She could mentally prepare for that. And so those
Mhm.
meetings ran a lot smoother because she wasn't just saying, okay, well, why are you having these problems? You shouldn't have these problems. It's okay. So what are you facing? What are you challenged with? Right. So those things can be really helpful to help some folks who don't just pick this up naturally to be able to be ready for it. So this might be something that you might want to do with your staff, right? And start with the topic, right? And think about what it is that you need from your supervisor. Right. I mean, this should be a employee-led meeting, right? But it's also something where that supervisor, it's important for them to understand what it is you need from them. I need your advice. I need you to walk me through something. This is something new. I just need to remember this, or I've never done this before. Can you, can I, or I'm just not, I'm it's not registering. Can you walk me through it? Right? Or
Mhm.
maybe I need more training on this, right? Or hey, I'm really getting the hang of this. I know there's some people on the floor who aren't necessarily picking this up like I am. Is there, I can, if you want, I know you're busy. I can spend 20 minutes or a half an hour at the next staff meeting walking people through this process, right? So there's different needs for different folks. Some folks want to take on that responsibility of further education and development of other people. Other people may not even think that it's something that's available unless you bring it up, right? And so there's many different possibilities that can happen at the end of a meeting if you give people the ability to be flexible and to lead how they want to be led.
I have one other little thing that it just came to my mind. And I'm curious on your thoughts about it. So not I'm trying to think of how to word this. Thinking specifically about like government. A lot of times when something is new for like employees, it is new for like supervisors and leadership at the same time. So I know like a lot of frustration comes from like we'll use the new system as an example. I mean, everybody moved over to this automated system. Supervisors, managers, analysts were at the same trainings that staff was at because it was new for everybody. And I know that sometimes there's some frustration from staff members when they go and they are trying to learn the skill and they have a question and they're like, "Oh, let me go ask my supervisor." And the supervisor also doesn't know the answer. But they're like, "They're my supervisor. They should know," right? How do we navigate around the idea that maybe I can't give high direction because I'm unsure too, and I want to be highly supportive, but they don't want my freaking support. They want the answer, right? Like I know that this isn't covered in situational leadership, but like my first thought comes to like incredible humility
Mhm.
of saying, I got no idea. Let's figure it out.
Let's learn together. Let's look at
Yeah.
I had a supervisor who would pull out the regs and say, let's look at the regs, or pull them up in the internet. Let's look at what this
Yeah.
says. I've never been through this either. It's, I mean, just because you're a supervisor doesn't mean that, everything is plugged into your brain.
Right.
It's so important to remember that a supervisor is a leader um, in terms of how they are managing you. It doesn't mean that they have all the institutional knowledge, right? And so, but in
Right.
government service, that is very often what is thought of, right? A lot of times
Yeah.
they think of, The supervisor has to be the mentor. They have to train other people how to do the job. That's not everyone's skill set is in training, right? And
Right.
so it's just, can I, you know, can I help you feel supported in you doing your job, right? And so, yeah, let's look it up together. Yeah, I don't know that either. That's a great question. Let's find that out. And then now we're working together on it. And
Mhm.
I mean, very rarely if I when I had a supervisor, I didn't go back to say, oh, well, the supervisor didn't know either. No, we learned together. She didn't know. And so we looked at it and we figured it out. It was actually a positive thing that I looked forward to rather than, oh, I'm testing the supervisor as much as I'm testing these, right? So, but it is, but you have to get out of that mindset of I'm supposed to know this stuff, right? If you're one of those people who says, I have to know everything that somebody else knows, good luck. Good luck. That's rough.
Yeah.
That's a lot of work, right? So if something
Yeah.
comes up, oh, I was in that training too, and I didn't quite get that. Let's look at it. Okay, I'm still not quite sure. You know what? Let me call the training supervisor and see what they're saying about this, right? But just
Mhm.
or if you want to go back and get your work done, let me call them and then I'll come back with an answer. Or sit tight and we'll figure this out together. Let me call them, right? So I mean, these are things that take, like you mentioned, humility, right? And uh, collaboration, a collaborative feeling, which for me, the idea of being a servant leader is about how do I support my team, right? So I'm team focused, which means if I don't know something, it'd be great for me to learn. That way my team can learn.
Yeah. I agree with you. And I think the other part that I think is important for us to understand, especially in government, is that when we give directives, sometimes we're giving directives with limited information. And that I think is important for us to be able to communicate with our staff as well in that directive phase. Um, and what I mean by that is like, this is what we're doing right now. And as we get more information, this may change. Like giving people space to understand that everything that we do is temporary. Like you may have learned at training on Monday that this is the process, and that process changed on Wednesday. And so now on Friday, you're actually going to be doing something different. And that's kind of like the reality of learning is get fluent in what is, but don't get attached to it and always be open to like the new way, whatever that looks like. People get really stuck on what they know. And this is where, again, you get stuck in that like R1 or the D1, D2 phases is that, well, I knew what I knew, and now you're telling me it's different, and I'm resistant to that new information.
Mhm.
But just keep in mind that everything that we do has to stay fluid. It has to keep ebbing and flowing like the waves. They're going to keep coming, and you just have to find ways to navigate that. And there's not always going to be certainty in the directive. There has to be, again, we're asking leaders to be flexible, but I'm going to say for those of us being led, you have to stay flexible as well, because even the best plan can deviate from time to time, and um, it's not poor leadership sometimes, it's just the reality of life, and you
All
just got to
county
go with the
letter,
flow.
an all county
Yeah.
letter can change the flow of your life.
Don't say it 3 times in a mirror, please. By all means, don't say it
Yeah,
three
yeah,
times.
yeah. If you say it 3 times, your knee's gonna buckle and your life's gonna
Yeah.
change.
Yeah. So don't do it. But yeah, no, I just think that's an important concept with this, and be open um to share with your supervisor or your leader, whoever that is, what you need. If they're not giving you what you need, don't just assume they should know this,
Yeah.
but be open to advocate for yourself and say, you know what, you've told me how to do this 4 times. I don't need you to tell me what form. I'm asking why. Why do we fill this out? Where does this information go? What are you looking for? You know, that's what I need to understand. Like, I know it's you check the box, but why would I choose this box over that box? That's what I'm really curious about. So being able to advocate for what you really need and not just assuming that your leader is going to be able to know that. Because again, this is a great framework, but it is very subjective in how to assess what level somebody's at. So I might think you need something else based on the information I have, but nobody knows better what you need than you. So be willing to be vulnerable yourself and be open to that. That's my hot tip for the day. That's Tiff's hot tip. Be vulnerable. Be vulnerable, be humble.
All right. So, in wrapping up this conversation, just thinking about, you know, who are the people that I'm coming into contact with on a regular basis, and what is it they need? What is it that they need from me? What is it they need from me today? What is it they might need from me tomorrow? What is it that they might need from me in a different context, right? Which means stay flexible. You said stay flexible, or stay bendable, or I always go back to aliens, stay frosty, right? So just always be aware that somebody's context and somebody's expertise may not necessarily serve them 100% of the time, and how can we help them to be who they want to be. All
Yep.
right. Well, until the next time we meet, I'm going to be who I want to be as much as possible. So um, thank you all for joining us again. And I'm Carl.
I am Tiff.
Stay frosty, my friends.
And keep it real.
All right.
Keep it real.